So, we're going to talk about something that might be triggering to some of you. I'm not sure. Because we all do this. It's something that we all do on some level, myself included. And I always talk about the concept of awareness, right? Like, you are not getting anywhere unless you start to become aware of your patterns, okay? Which I think is a really great way to kind of like kickstart your growth, right? Like, kickstart your healing journey without feeling overwhelmed, like, that mentality, right? Or of like, I got so much shit to deal with, like I'm a hot mess, kind of thing. It's one baby step at a time, and step one is figuring out how to be somewhat more mindful in your life and slowing down, and that leads to step two of awareness, because we can't really become aware until we slow the F down and start noticing what's going on. Hey Carlos, what's up? Thanks for joining me. So like I said, it might be a little triggering of a conversation, because some of this, I would be willing to guess that some of the ways in which we self-medicate and numb ourselves, and even some of our addictions, that's, most of us are somewhat aware on some level that there is something to be addressed in that category, but we avoid it like the plague, potentially. Like, avoid actually sitting with those emotions and those thoughts and actually taking a closer look at our patterns in this way. So it could be a little triggering. One of my good friends, I'm just drawing attention to a post that one of my good friends shared the other day. She shared a picture of her. It was just a picture that she took of the beach. She was at the beach. And she wrote, "Sorry, not sorry, I'm self-medicating after a long, crazy week." And I just had to not correct her, but just make sure that she was aware that going to the beach to relax your ass is not self-medicating. That is a very healthy way of self-soothing, especially if it was like after a really hard day or a long week or a rough occurrence, whatever the hell happened. So we have, under this umbrella of self-care, we have self-soothing and self-preservation. I think that there are a lot of other categories of self-care, but I think that at any given time, depending on how you're using that practice of self-care, it could fall into either self-soothing or self-preservation. Self-soothing being ways in which you can soothe yourself, reliable practices for soothing yourself when the shit hits the fan and you are going through a really stressful time. And then you have self-preservation practices within the self-care umbrella, which is ways that you are sustaining your wellness for the future, for long term. So your diet, your exercise, your lifestyle stuff, that's all sustaining you, right? And then over here on the outside of that is self-medicating, which does not fall into the umbrella of self-care, obviously. So yeah, I just said to my friend who posted the picture of her at the beach, I'm like, that is a very healthy mode of self-soothing. You're not self-medicating. Don't apologize for having to excuse yourself to the beach because you had such, you know what I mean? It was almost like, sorry, not sorry, I needed this. It's like, you do not need to apologize for having a very healthy practice of self-soothing that needed to happen, that you were able to make yourself, make it happen. So, it's so funny. I just love it, because I have changed like the schedule of how I come in when I come into the group. And I just noticed that for the past 3 weeks that I've been doing this, I'm always like on in and around 11:11. So maybe that just needs to be my live time on Fridays, 11:11. I won't go into numerology today. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about that side topic, self-medicating, which obviously isn't self-soothing. Self-medicating is when we need to either distract or numb ourselves of whatever is going on, as opposed to soothing ourselves in a way that is healthy, in which we can still feel our feelings. We can still be in the moment. We can still move through whatever is going on internally, right? But self-medicating is we are legit numbing ourselves and cutting that process off at the bit. So let's just look at it like that, right? Like, we've talked about so much in this group, and I talk about all the time on the show, on the podcast. Sorry, the phone is ringing, but it will be done in a moment. I talk about all the time the need to feel your feelings. I mean, you've heard it from more than one person than me, okay? And I've been talking a lot about trauma lately. Trauma being our experience of a hard thing. Not the hard thing that happens, but our experience of the hard thing, and whether or not we are able to process the emotions that go along with our experience in a safe and supported environment in order for us to learn and grow from that experience and actually go through the full arc of emotions so that release can occur on the other end, and that we can remain whole and connected to ourselves through that full process, or whether we don't even have a safe and supported space and environment to do any of that. Again, that is that ability to actually grow from a challenge or a hardship, and to even come out of it on the other side without sacrificing your connection to yourself and having to, for example, appear okay, seem okay for everybody else's comfort level, right? Then you don't have a safe space to process. So in talking a lot about how trauma can stay with us in our body if we don't have that space, that safe space to process when a hard thing happens, the exact same thing is happening when we self-medicate, because we are numbing ourselves on our own. Like, instead of it being, for example, wink, wink, a parent telling you, don't you dare cry, right? You're going through a childhood trauma during your developmental stage, and every time there is a need for you to release emotion because you're dealing with some shit, your parent, for example, says, don't you dare cry. And so you stop yourself from crying, you stop the release from happening, you fall in line with how everybody else needs you to look and appear at the moment, okay, and you do not have the ability to release that trauma from your body. When we self-medicate, we're just doing that same thing to ourselves. We're just doing that exact same thing to ourselves. We're turning around and saying, don't you dare feel, don't you dare or don't you dare lose it because of this is such a hard day, or don't you dare, don't you dare feel, pretty much, right? Too much feeling. So some of us have trauma from our past that would have planted an idea in our heads that would cause us to have this reaction. That idea is that simply discomfort, any form of discomfort, whether it's just like a lot of feelings, or whether it even is like discomfort in the body that like feels like we need to change something right away, or emotional discomfort, any discomfort is wrong. That idea, for so many of us, is a story that we absorbed in our childhood from situations like that, don't you dare cry, or different words and different stories told in different ways from voices of authority that taught us how to live. And so many of us learned the lesson of discomfort is bad. If there's discomfort, run. If there's discomfort, distract ourselves. Another example of distracting children from discomfort so that they learn that discomfort is bad and that they should continue to numb themselves of it as they continue is when a child cries and you hand them a piece of candy to shut them up. So it's a very simple example, but let's face it, people do that all the time, all day, every day, specifically grandparents. But anyway, parents do that, but we do that with children all the time. In it's just an example. We do that in many different ways. It might not be a piece of candy, but we might turn the TV on, for example, to distract them from the emotional release that is happening. And it could not be crying, for example. It could be a temper tantrum, screaming, right? And again, we come back around to not only is there discomfort going on and an emotional release and a reaction, and which is technically just a processing of emotions and a processing of trauma that we want to distract them from. But what happens is when we grow up and we become parents or aunts or uncles or caregivers or whatever it is, that perpetuates, because now your children, and again, like a lot of times, many times I tie this back to parenting because it's my experience, many times, and it relates to what another thing we can talk about, which is mommy wine culture and how moms are sold wine, for example, as a way to self-medicate the craziness of having kids. Because what happens is if your kid is, whether they're toddlers or small children or teenagers or whatever, all of those emotions and all of that discomfort and all that crazy that you have to deal with from them, that is discomfort for you as the parent. And now you have learned that you need to numb yourself of that discomfort. And so when somebody in marketing somewhere tells you that having a glass of wine at the end of the day is self-care for mommies, or self-care for or having a beer at the end of your work day or whatever it is a form of self-care or a way to just chill out, we accept that wholeheartedly. Because we were literally taught to numb our discomfort at every turn. We've been taught this for generations at this point. Hi, Danette. Thanks for joining me. So if any of this is resonating with you as I'm talking, I would love for you to drop me a comment if you have the time, and just let me know how it's resonating with you, and maybe a way in which in your life and context it's relatable. So I'm just bringing to light the fact that there is this self-medicating that we do. So I brought up alcohol as a way to self-medicate that many of us use. And again, I know this can be a triggering conversation because so many people drink alcohol or use alcohol to numb or abuse alcohol, right? There's definitely varying levels, and even varying levels in between those levels, right? We don't have to say, oh, if you use alcohol to relax at the end of the day, you're an alcoholic or you're an addict. That is just not correct, and it is not accurate, and it is not productive in any way to use labels like that. So just putting that out there for anybody who might be triggered by this conversation in that way. It doesn't mean that I'm saying that there is something wrong or that I am trying to shame you in any way for drinking alcohol. Another way in which we numb ourselves is from any form of discomfort, instead of actually allowing the full arc of emotions to process and play out so that we can actually come out still connected to ourselves and our truth on the other side of a hardship. Another way in which we self-medicate is eating, emotional eating, of course. It's possible that emotional eating and eating as a form of numbing, they are similar but also different, because I think emotional eating is more like I am feeling an emotion and I would like to numb it, so I'm going to eat a cheeseburger or have some candy or sugar or whatever it is. But it's also like emotional eating a lot of times is so connected to the body, because you will literally be processing an emotion based on something that is going on for you. And we become so disconnected from our bodies that we don't notice the physical reaction that our body is giving us based on an emotional tension. And we misread that as a hunger cue, for example, right? So there's a lot of ways in which we either numb ourselves, like legit numb uncomfortable feelings with food, but we also distract ourselves with food too, which is kind of similar, right? We're distracting ourselves from we're either distracting ourselves from an emotion, or we could be distracting ourselves from a task that we're avoiding. Why? Because doing a task that we don't really want to do is uncomfortable. And because we've been taught that anything uncomfortable is bad and that we need to move away from it. So I'm setting up this conversation with the idea of that root cause of the problem, why we tend to distract and numb and self-medicate in general, is because we have been taught that discomfort is bad. I would like to now give you an example. I mean, so many ways in which we could go on and on as far as the ways in which we numb, right? We have the alcohol, we have the food, we have our phones, we have technology, we have so many things. And whatever, if you're watching this and you're like, oh yeah, like this is another way, like give more examples, provide more examples, because I think that anybody who's watching this could absolutely, use those examples. If they might fit into their lives, it might resonate with somebody. I want to give you an example of why discomfort is not bad. I like to attempt to respond to the root cause of something. So if the root cause of the reason we feel the need to numb and distract and self-medicate ourselves is that we've been taught that discomfort is bad, is that uncomfortable situations and feelings are just bad and that we need to move on from them as fast as we possibly can, then that is the pattern that we need to address. Discomfort is not bad. Is that something that we can get our head around? Is that something that we can absorb, perhaps? And incorporate that almost like as a mantra into our lives? Discomfort is not bad. Uncomfortable feelings and situations are not made to be run away from. Things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. And let me explain, because I brought trauma into this conversation too, which there are so many different varying levels of trauma. It doesn't need to be some insane disaster in your life. But let me put this into context based on the current situation that we're in right now. We just got hit by a hurricane in New Jersey, okay? And a lot of people lost not only their basements, but some people their homes. That is a high level of trauma. Trauma doesn't have to be a situation that is to that level of severity, but that's definitely included in the category. And I'm not saying that you need to shame yourself if after a disaster in this way you sit down and you're like, I need a fucking drink. Absolutely not. No way. There are ways in which, I said this in the beginning of the conversation, there are ways in which I still self-medicate occasionally. There are ways in which everybody still self-medicates occasionally. It's going to happen. It's just about whether or not we can be super aware when it happens so that we can catch it before it gets completely out of hand and you have a situation of addiction. So many of us have addiction to alcohol, cigarettes, technology, our phones. Our phone is a perfect example of how we continuously distract ourselves. We start scrolling through social media to distract, and then it becomes an addiction because of that dopamine hit, because of that connection, that immediate gratification, right? It feels really fucking good. Addiction happens because we are so desperately looking to soothe a pain inside of us that we absolutely become addicted not to the substance itself or to the technology itself or whatever it might be, but to the instant soothing and gratification that happens from that easy fix. Things can get out of hand quite quickly. And then that substance or that technology or whatever it is that you've now become attached to will cause other small and big parts of your life to suffer in small and big ways. So I'm going back real quick to address the discomfort, the reason why. What is the reason why we find the need to numb ourselves and distract ourselves? Because we were taught that discomfort and uncomfortable feelings and situations are something to numb, to distract from, and to run away from, and to move past as quickly as possible. And that is the root cause, the root belief that causes us to do these things, so we have to address that. Like I said before, can we get on board with, in our daily lives and in our belief systems, the fact that uncomfortable situations and feelings, we don't have to run away from them? This is why we hear the phrase all the time, like, allow yourself to feel your feelings, to actually move through this full arc of emotions. Many of us don't do this for various reasons. I think a lot of us don't do this, skip this step, not only because we have that belief in our head and it's also sold to us, literally. It's literally like self-medicating. Things that are definitely about numbing and distracting ourselves are completely sold to us as self-care and self-soothing. So we buy that, and that's okay, because how could we not? But we have to become aware of that. And I will give an example. It may or may not resonate with you. I'll give an example to you that is, of course, connected to yoga as to why discomfort, or an example of discomfort being good. Say you're coming into a stretch or a yoga pose or whatever, okay? Think about the feeling that comes into your body when you're moving into a stretch that is like so needed. It's so needed. There is a part of that internal feeling that is discomfort. I always talk in my yoga classes about mild, moderate, or severe discomfort. Mild discomfort is something that absolutely will grow you. You need that resistance in your life and in your body in order for the yoga practice and life to still be considered a practice. We practice and practice and practice. We're not perfecting anything. We're not mastering anything. We practice, and we always call it a practice because we have that slight discomfort and challenge and resistance every time we go slightly further and slightly further and slightly further. And if we don't feel that at all, if we don't feel that mild discomfort that after a breath or two actually becomes potentially euphoric, right? If we don't even allow ourselves to even feel that tip of the iceberg, that bit of mild discomfort, then we will never grow. We will never grow. And we will forget growing, right? We will never break up the tension or the blockage or the trauma inside of us if we never allow ourselves to feel it. So that's my analogy, that's my metaphor for, like, we gotta allow ourselves to understand that discomfort is not bad. Okay, the point of life is not to avoid all forms of discomfort. It isn't. Now, here's the best part. If you find yourself numbing yourself or distracting yourself or self-medicating in any and all ways, this is the beautiful part of self-care, is that the opposite of self-medicating is self-soothing. So all we have to do is find self-soothing practices like breath, or like having a good stretch, or like taking a nap, or like calling your best friend, or taking a walk, or taking a bath, or, you know, giving yourself a little temple massage, or anything. Okay, I can come up with a whole list for you guys. And then you can, if you want, you can tell me they all suck and I'll come up with a new list. All we have to do is become aware of the ways in which we self-medicate, and then notice when it's about to happen, and then perhaps just second guess that for a second and reevaluate, and then switch ourselves off into a self-soothing mode as opposed to self-medicating. Hi, Jen. Thanks for joining me. I am winding down this conversation, but I'd love it if you wanted to re-listen. So, and give me your comments or feedback. So, I'm not saying that if you find yourself addicted to a substance or addicted to an activity or addicted to a technology, I am not saying that recovering from that addiction, all you have to do is flip from self-medicating mode to self-soothing mode every time and you'll be fine. Once you are, for example, if there is an addiction to alcohol, for example, right? The process is much more complicated than that, but I do believe that awareness is still part of that process. This simple awareness of like, my Lord, why do I feel the need to numb myself? I feel the need to numb myself because I just simply cannot address what is going on, the elephant in the room, or because I have been taught that discomfort is something to be numbed, to run away from. It's kind of interesting because it's just a limiting belief, right? That the fact that discomfort is something to run away from and to numb and distract from is just a limiting belief, and that's what so many of us struggle with in the first place. Is just these stories that were told to us from generations past that we live by that aren't actually aligned with our truth. So it's actually a trauma within itself when a child or any kind of vulnerable or susceptible human absorbs a limiting belief or a story that is not accurate, and that is in most cases based on someone else's trauma, right? So winding down from this conversation, I'm going to come back to where we started, which is the fact that like I was saying, how my friend posted about her beach day. Sorry, not sorry. I'm self-medicating after a long week. Going to the beach and having some alone time is not self-medicating. It's self-soothing. And we need those self-soothing and self-preserving or self-preservation practices within our self-care toolbox. Self-medicating is over here on this side. When you find yourself distracting yourself, numbing yourself of emotions or avoiding situations. Avoidance is another word to maybe Google here. That's when we just need to become aware, right? And the last thing I'm going to say is that I had an amazing conversation specifically about addiction and recovery, specifically about becoming sober from alcohol with an amazing woman. Her name is Amanda. You can find her on Instagram at Sober Musings with Mandy. And she shares her whole sobriety journey. And we didn't get too much into literal alcoholism in this conversation, but we don't need to, because this conversation has to happen first about ways in which we self-medicate. However, I am going to post in the comments the link to the episode with Mandy about being sober and living sober, and which can be applied to anyone and anything. It doesn't have to be regarding alcohol. And I would love for you to take a listen. And I am going to be having some more information about potentially having a little challenge in the group, giving up something you're addicted to. I was going to do like a sober challenge for 2 weeks in October, or actually potentially towards the end of this month into October. But I might switch it up to more like, what are we giving up that we need to take a break from Is it your phone? Is it a certain category of food? Is it, what are you self-medicating with? What are you relying on to soothe you that isn't a healthy self-soothing practice? If it's not a healthy self-soothing practice, then you're medicating because you're numbing out. I know. Ouch. It hurts. Truth hurts, baby. So that is all I got for you today. If you're watching this on the replay, I would love for you to still just drop in like #replay or just let me know you're rewatching it in some way. I'd love to hear from you also how it's resonating. Even if you want to scream at me and tell me to F off, go ahead. Go ahead. And certainly if you have anything to add, I want to know. I want to know. Thank you so much, Danette, Carlos, and Jennifer for joining me. Have an amazing weekend.